Right? Stephen Wright?
Oh, yes.
Paul.
But, Jay, we can't talk about Stephen Wright now because it's...
Oh, you know what? We don't have a poem.
Oh, no.
I can get one.
Oh, I know you can.
Unless you want.
Jay's...
You want to?
Go. No. Go.
Are we hot right now?
Oh, yes, Jay.
Uh-oh.
This is our intro. It's our hot intro. So this is the start of our next episode. Jay, we just finished up 5 episodes of Romeo and Juliet, all of which were fantastic in my opinion.
Yeah.
And,
we're very proud of our humility here.
Yeah, it's one of our number one traits. Yeah, I agree. And today we're going to...
I have a perfect poem for
I knew
you.
you would. So while you're pulling that up for us, because we cannot start without a poem, I'm going to tell everybody what we're doing next. So we've got 2 episodes here that are intermediate episodes, and then we're going to get back to our texts. Next text up is Hamlet. So we're going to tackle that play because we feel like we're capable of doing it, right? Hey.
Well, it's funny. You and I have talked. I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but it's one of those texts that the more we spend time with, the less we feel secure in it.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think that's okay to talk about. This is like teacher counseling, teacher therapy here. It's fine.
Right. I'm totally with you there. The text scares me to death, but I think even talking about that, why is it scary? Everyone, like you might know you're supposed to think is awesome, but why? Yeah. So we'll do that. So I don't know. We'll probably do 5 episodes.
That'll be fun
on Hamlet. I think it's good. Maybe we can bring in some other voices we've talked about.
Yeah.
So it'd be nice to have a guest in on this. And then after that, for the summer 2021, you're still up for digging into the Odyssey, right?
Oh, always.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
So we may go hardcore and go full in and episode a book.
Why not?
Right.
Some will be longer than others.
Yeah.
But
yeah. No, it's worth. I think it's worth doing. So that's it. But today, totally different. Not a book. We want to talk about teaching in the time of COVID. And maybe the alternate title of this episode is Disembodied Teaching.
Right. I know.
Yeah. But hey, did you find a poem?
Yeah, this is one of my favorites. So I love Billy Collins, and he has a poem in which he imagines living in a town where all the residents are students that he's taught.
Okay.
So I'm just thinking, since we have a COVID episode, which is going to be about text, but it's also just going to be about the act of teaching in this peculiar year, I just think a poem connected to teaching and students would be good. So this is called Schoolsville by Billy Collins. Glancing over my shoulder at the past, I realize the number of students I've taught is enough to populate a small town. I can see it nestled in a paper landscape, chalk dust flurrying down in winter, nights dark as a blackboard. The population ages but never graduates. On hot afternoons, they sweat the final in the park, and when it's cold, they shiver around stoves, reading disorganized essays out loud. A bell rings on the hour, and everybody zigzags into streets with their books. I forgot all their last names first and their first names last in alphabetical order. But the boy who always had his hand up is an alderman and owns the haberdashery. The girl who signed her papers in lipstick leans against the drugstore, smoking, brushing her hair like a machine. Their grades are sewn into their clothes like references to Hawthorne. The A's stroll along with other A's. The D's honk whenever they pass another D. All the creative writing students recline on the courthouse lawn and play the lute. Wherever they go, they form a big circle. Needless to say, I am the mayor. I live in the white colonial at Maple and Main. I rarely leave the house. The car deflates in the driveway. Vines twirl around the porch swing. Once in a while, a student knocks on the door with a term paper 15 years late, or a question about Yeats or double spacing. And sometimes one will appear in a window pane to watch me lecturing the wallpaper, quizzing the chandelier, reprimanding the air.
Billy Collins,
Schoolsville. I love that premise.
I like that poem. It's and it's appropriate for today's talk too, because we've been teaching students who are outside of anything close to a Schoolsville. Even just being on campus, that town, the town of school campus, doesn't exist or barely existed this year. And for many of us teaching, it didn't exist at all. It was all completely virtual, which in my book really doesn't count. And I think that might be the path I want to talk about a little bit today, is why I don't think that counts. I think maybe there'll be some people listening who agree. So let's dig into it. Teaching this year, this is for the record, school year started 2020, school year 2020. We're coming to the end of that school year. It's April 2021. And it was a mess, a hot mess, right? I mean, we don't really do research for this show. I don't know what the stats are, but a lot of schools were shut down, moderately or quasi shut down. People working in cohorts, things like that, and it just blew up teaching entirely. It was an enormous struggle in my hometown for the town school to get open. It was one of the last in our whole region to open at all. They were online just about the entire year. So, it was a tough thing all the way around. So, where did it land for you, Jay? As you start to look back on it, we're kind of at the end of it. What do you think you're going to take away from it?
Yeah, no, it's good. As you know, Paul, because we're friends, my dad passed of COVID on May 1st. And I came to, and my son, who's a student at our school, is a sophomore where you and I teach, was affected by my father's death very differently than the rest of the family. We're all affected, obviously, but it was really interesting. He holds a lot of his feelings in, and it's been really hard for him even now. So I just decided on the first day of school, half of our kids were in the class, half were on Zoom screens, that I just said in a really honest way, I said what happened to my dad. I didn't go into details, but I just, I wanted them to know that this was actually in my life and not just something on CNN.
Right.
And I just said, we're going to read a lot of good books. I'm going to help you with your writing. We're going to talk about books. And I'm not going to be worried about do we finish 81% or 100% or 74% of the curriculum.
Yeah.
I'll help you when you need help. When you need help, reach out to me. And let's just make this about enjoying literature together. I don't want to make this a place of anxiety and stress. I think I don't know how often this gets discussed when people study to be teachers, but there is an acting component to the job, and not just being enthusiastic about our content. But there are days where our families are not in a good place. There are days where our kid is sick and we don't know what it is. There are days where we're worried about an older relative. There are days where we're just not doing okay. And none of that can matter once we start teaching. It's not our students' problem. Our problems are not their problems. And I also think that mitigating anxiety, when you talk to people who teach special ed, or I think of our colleague who taught kids on the autism spectrum, that one of the things that he learned was if you mitigate anxiety, teaching and learning can happen.
Yeah.
To create an environment where it's safe. We talk about safe spaces, and that's kind of a cliche now. Yeah. But if a kid, particularly I'm thinking of kids that aren't confident in English, Paul, right? Yeah. Which we teach those kids. I mean, we're high school teachers, right? If they know that they can take risks and raise their hand and be wrong and it's not going to be awful, and I don't know. I just think this year highlighted a lot of things that we all that are teachers know anyway. It just highlighted it in a starker fashion, that just to make our classrooms a place where anxiety isn't the dominant feeling. Right. I think was important for my students, but I'll be honest, really important for me.
Right.
I wasn't, not only because my dad was sick and passed away last spring. I'm not good doing this remotely, like me personally. Some people are. I have a student who's been remote all year and he's killing it. He's great. Okay. He has a grandparent in his house, you know what I mean, who has health challenges. So he's home. Right. There are people that can do it. I'm just not. Yeah. I have friends, and you do too, who work remotely now, and it's fine and they love it. And I would go crazy. It's not me. I like the energy of a room with a bunch of kids in it.
Yeah. I'm with you. And when you take that theme of anxiety, which, is in the room every year, in some way or another. Yeah. This year makes it particularly hard to the degree that's important. It's almost impossible because anxiety is boosted this year for all sorts of obvious and not obvious reasons. And then I think mitigating anxiety, addressing it, even recognizing it via Zoom is a filter that makes it even harder to do. That filters out the connection, filters out your realization of it, filters out students' appreciation of your realization of it, and you're addressing it. So those two things together make that whole topic that you're talking about, for me, almost impossible. I felt so, for me, every class that I was on Zoom for, even partially on Zoom for, where I had students in front of me and students in Zoom, like at the start, my instinct was to just almost laugh. Especially when the class was fully in Zoom. And it's like, it was a farce.
It's so weird.
Yeah, weird. And then when I reflected on it, I felt like this is just not real. Like I can check in with them and say, maybe I could give them some assignments. Okay, scurry along. Now go read or write or, do this grammar, sheet.
It's like speed dating with a hologram.
I never thought of that, but yes.
I mean, it's just weird in every way.
Yeah, exactly. How's that like dating? How's that like being in the restaurant?
Right. Yeah.
It's not like it enough at all to really be it. It's a whole different thing. So I started going, my headspace, I went to, I've homeschooled students and families, before on the side. And that's sort of the world I started, which was a lot of that was managing students who were kind of independent and putting together curricula and making sure they were staying on track. My mind kind of went in that direction. So I stopped thinking about being a classroom teacher, really, and started thinking about these students are going to have to work primarily independently, which I felt like they were, even if I didn't take that approach or not, because you don't know what they're doing at home. All the things you do to try to monitor, their activity or keep your camera on. I want to see your eyeballs, in the camera, and calling on people. You can do all that, but... And
adults are we both know this. Go to a faculty meeting or talk to other adults with other jobs. If you have a phone or a computer in front of you and someone isn't incredibly engaging 50 feet away in front of a screen, it's awfully hard not to make your grossry list right there.
That's exactly right.
So if we're that way, Paul, right? If we're that way...
Because we're mature people and we're disciplined.
Oh God, yeah.
And I've got that all worked out. And
I'm definitely not adding scallions to my grocery list on my phone right now. Actually, as you're talking,
Jay, put the phone down. That's how I know. That's how I know it's true.
Right.
No matter what the student says, I'm like, but if I were you sitting there, and when I am, like you're saying, when I am,
and I think that's good.
Meeting, that is what I'm doing.
I think that's good. I think a lot of conversations about teaching this year. By people who aren't teachers particularly, will kind of put kids in neat little boxes and stuff. And the fact of the matter is, I think most of us that are teaching English have, on the high school level, run classes that are mostly conversational.
Yeah.
And I think hybrid, it just makes that difficult because of audio issues and just the disembodied nature of it. So the sacrifice of the thing that is the inherent center of our class has been really difficult.
Right.
I think kids are just differently sized versions of us. I don't think we're any different in terms of attention span, and put me in front of a computer and someone's kind of vaguely talking in the background, but I'm on my couch at home. So that's been, I think some of it is, I'm just thinking of what's teaching been like a surrender. There's a lot of surrendering, and there's almost a spiritual component to it. Like, all right, well, what's the core of what I do? And what can I keep in the core? Reading and talking about books with kids and having them write and helping them. Just finding ways to do that. And, if I'm not giving the same number of quizzes, if I'm not, I don't know, if the conversation doesn't, there's so much, I'm just, we're doing the best we can. And how many people are you hearing in various spheres of life just, all right. And some of it is like a mantra, like just to make yourself be okay with the inadequacy of the times, but it's fine.
Yeah. That's it. Like that core, that, like I was saying, like just putting together a curriculum and trying to put people on a schedule. That felt like the bottom line thing I could provide.
Right. I want to say too, can I just jump in with one other thing?
Please.
In terms of the content, I wanted to address the different focus when discussing the content of the literature I teach. I found it really interesting. I want to talk about a freshman thing and a senior thing real quick. Our freshmen begin the year with a pretty common book taught in like 8th, 9th grade curricula around the country right now, The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian. In every single year I've taught that book. Junior Spirit goes from the reservation school to like an upper middle class, mostly white school outside of his town. Mm-hmm. So he transfers schools, and we teach at a private school where all of our freshmen are not going to school with their hometown friends. All of our freshmen, and just for the audience, it's a boys' Catholic prep school, and I went to that school, and you're called all kinds of homophobic epithets, and this is since time immemorial, guys at our school. Right. So when we were in the middle of first third, I'd say, of True Diary for about 8 or 9 years in a row, it would come up just organically. Kids would say, well, Junior's having these struggles at his new school, and geez, my hometown friends just said this to me or posted this about me.
Right.
This was the first year where none of that happened. And I actually was, in a moment of bad teaching, said, hey, has anybody tipped my hand? Is anybody dealing with stuff with your hometown friends right now? Because you're at no one.
Okay.
So one effect of COVID, at least for my students this year, is whatever sort of strained relationships were happening with the various little communities of kids they're a part of, it just wasn't happening because everybody was like busy surviving and staying home, and there didn't seem to be the energy for that.
Yeah.
So
they weren't even meeting up with their friends.
No, right early in the year particularly. Yeah. So I found that strange. And then just with all of my classes, students seem a little more attuned with looking at, I don't know how they'd word it. My seniors maybe more overtly than my freshmen. But I think because there's a sense of disconnect and loneliness this year, that they see that in books differently in 2021. Yeah. My seniors just finished Pride and Prejudice.
Wow.
And Darcy is as privileged a character as you're going to meet in a work of literature.
Yeah.
But in so many ways, he's alone. And he spent a lot of his life alone. And I've taught it a few times, but for the first time, kids brought that up as a thing to talk about. And they didn't outwardly connect it to COVID, but it came up with Hamlet too a little bit. It came up with that book, The Housekeeper and the Professor, that I teach to freshmen by Yoko Ogawa. Just characters' loneliness, like what loneliness feels like. And I really tried my best not to say, and how is that like your loneliness? That's really bad. So, just let him talk. But it's just interesting.
Leading the witness.
Right. Yeah. So I just find that, and this isn't a revelation, that the life we're in year to year shapes everything. And that includes our reading. That, we just did Romeo and Juliet podcasts. But Paul, in 10 years or 20 years, if we redo those, we're going to have different things to say. And I think that like talking about how books are different this year I think it's peculiar because COVID's a different thing than just time passing. But I don't know. I just, it's I think it's a good reminder for me as a teacher is all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is. And that, and that very point is the one in thinking about this podcast that I landed on with this title of Disembodied Teaching. And I started going down this path of, which I'm on anyway, which is anti-tech, especially in the classroom. I'm a very low/no tech person, and a lot of that is my own personal preference. But of course, I want to philosophize about that and say that it's not just my preference, but it's the right thing to do, of course. And that's what I'm coming out of. I think. I don't know. I've sort of almost a fear coming out of COVID that many people will walk away saying, I don't need teachers and I don't need the classroom because I just came through a period of basically, if you're a parent at home with 3 kids on Zoom, you're doing a lot of.
Yeah, I don't hear parents saying that.
Yeah, no, they don't want them there. In terms of managing their day and their life.
Oh man!
But in terms of can you get through a school year and get through material with a far less interaction with a teacher than maybe some parents thought. Well, some people might think they can, or that it could be just moved online, moved on Zoom. Why not do Khan Academy and work my way through any given topic?
Yeah.
That's sort of the topic that's on my mind is the necessity of what we do in the classroom, the distinctive value that brings, and I think. As you're intimating, a lot of people will go to the other direction and say, no, I want my kids in that. I do want that for my own kids. And with that in my mind, I saw this article in this online, that was titled, the title caught me. I didn't know the author, and I just started looking at the journal. It's an online journal thing called The Public Discourse, and it's an online journal from an institute, the Witherspoon Institute. The title of the article was "On the Primacy of Embodiment," and I was like, here we go. This is what I want. Philosophy major, I knew. I was reading. I was thinking Aristotle and Plato, and sure enough, this is assistant professor of humanities at Wyoming Catholic College. I had not heard of it before.
Yeah.
And he just wrote this nice article, "The Primacy of Embodiment," and it hit on points that rang true for me of the necessity of treating students not as sort of abstract minds that can have data delivered to them via software, but instead that learning a subject and subject matters and novels and characters all fit within most naturally within a context, very concrete and embodied context. But to focus on the learners, I guess that's what I couldn't get over, is I felt like it was a farce trying to teach online because the students and I weren't in the same room. We couldn't read each other. Yeah. I couldn't pick up on those anxiety things like you were talking about. I couldn't pick up on those interest things.
Sure.
And here's maybe my first big point was because I feel like the two things that are filtered out, in these times it was by Zoom, but I would go with just about all the education apps and YouTube videos, which I watch an enormous number of. But the two things that are filtered out that I think you get in the classroom, I titled attention, and then this other word. And this is a title for another episode I want to do: mimesis. This whole topic of mimesis, of imitation. Mm-hmm. This is a deep topic, but we'll just take it at this level of imitation or representation. The meaning of the word mimesis, as there's a lot more there, but as imitation. In Zoom, attention is so diffused. And as teachers, I think one of the fundamental things we're doing is drawing students' attention to, and then fill in the blank. And then, as you said, you're putting on an act. Like I'm a showman on stage, but all of it is just backflips and juggling to try to trick students into paying attention to something they never would before.
Sure.
I mean, if you led a class successfully of 15 senior boys through Pride and Prejudice and you got them to read even 80% of that, then you did this, right? You drew their attention to something most of them are not going to pick up and read.
Sure.
Ever. At all. So I don't know. That's the big. So that topic of attention. Does that? I mean, that for me is, and I think whenever you and I were coming up, I remember in my early years as a teacher, a lot of time was spent talking about ADD and ADHD, and that was the first pandemic I remember as a teacher. Yeah. It was everywhere, legitimately.
And sadly, the overdiagnosis of it made it seem not real for everyone, and the reality is some people actually have it. But there was a lot of boys who were just energetic. I don't want to. This isn't my field, so I don't want to sound like I'm a therapist
at all. All I want to say.
But I just teach I've taught at a boys' school for 24 years, and that includes time in the 90s where the overdiagnosis of this was really prevalent.
Yeah. But it focused on attention, right? Inattention was the problem we were addressing. Impulsivity.
Even Sesame Street, Paul. I don't know if you read The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell.
Oh yeah.
There's a piece on why Sesame Street was successful, and later Blue's Clues, Dora the Explorer, I think, is included in there. And it's all about the science of maintaining kids' attention, because the genius of Sesame Street, if I remember his words correctly, was that the Children's Television Workshop figured out that if you can keep kids' attention, you can educate them. Like in 1969, I think Sesame Street started.
Right.
And that seems so self-evident and obvious.
Yes.
But Sesame Street, it's 2021. It's been on since 1969. Like there's a reason why.
Right. And they can keep kids' attention. And that's what's at stake in ADD: attention, inattention, impulsivity, hyperactivity, obviously. And I can't get over the fact that that online-based education is a threat to those things, a threat to fanning the flames of those things in our students. I mean, I think most devices phones, iPads, whatever. I mean, part of the two things they're really good at facilitating is inattention. I mean, that is their selling point, right?
Sure.
You can run multiple apps at the same time, and you can open new tabs endlessly. You know, you can have 1,000 tabs open on a good device.
Which is the metaphor used for ADD a lot, is having multiple tabs open and entertaining them.
Yes. We give them a device or ask them to learn on a device whose selling point is that it can do those things. Impulsivity just goes along with it, the fact that it can. And then the hyperactivity, I think, is cultivated by a physical being, a 14-year-old student who sits on a device and opens a whole bunch of tabs. At some point, they're going to go nuts, and they're going to have to go at least run around the room.
Sure.
And so the irony here, I guess, is what I'm saying, is that, as you were saying, ADD, ADHD, we all know, the overdiagnosis thing, but it's real, students really feel it.
Yep.
And we're asking them to learn to pay attention in a context in which attention is the very thing that is that's really being sold. Apps and social media, we know, are optimized for attention, optimized for hours spent.
Absolutely.
Right. Each is fighting for more attention because ad revenue is tied to clicks and to time spent on the podcast or on on the website. So they're actually selling. They're actually selling things that are optimized, and I think it's a more perverse version of the Sesame Street thing you're mentioning, which is that they're not trying to hold kids' attention to teach them. That's just the cover story.
Right.
The back end is revenue.
If we get 10 million people to see this ad, a certain number of them will buy the thing.
That's right.
There's algorithms that back up everything.
That's right. And I don't want anyone to take that point as inducement to stop listening to our podcast right now, because that's not
we are using tech.
That is not what I mean.
Right.
No, I understand. What we're talking about here, but it's. So the first point of attention, that is the thing that is threatened and is sacred, right? We all are going to die, and the way we spend our time and our attention is of utmost importance.
Sure.
And the one thing in the classroom, if there's something sacred about that space, it is that it's the place where strong teacher, effective, successful teacher is a teacher who can direct a diverse representation of attentions in kind of one-ish place.
Yeah.
And that's what's at stake. I feel like the online learning threatens that enormously.
Yeah. I think at the core, I agree with you. I would just say that I think it admits to degrees. That I think if you're at a traditional school with good teachers, that's the optimal way to do school for most kids, right? I think a benefit of online learning is that if a kid has a learning challenge and would benefit from a repeated experience of a lesson, that can't always, you could raise your hand and ask for the teacher to explain it again, but how many times you're going to do that in an algebra class? Yeah. So the existence of Khan Academy is super helpful for that. And I guess, to me, and I'd be curious to hear what you have to say about this, that I use sort of instructional videos in my class, in all my classes.
Right.
I like online learning if it serves the primary classroom experience and the solitary reading experience. So I value developing in kids the ability to read by themselves in a thoughtful, clear way. Okay. And then their ability to think aloud and process books aloud and write about them. If tech can aid and serve that, I'll use it.
Right.
If tech is just, in the early days where these conversations were new, it often felt like, teachers were working for Apple. We weren't even teachers. And try this. This is really great.
It's called Google Classrooms. Why is that?
Yeah. So
that's what you're talking about.
So I think I told you, and we're going to do this summer, but just with some of the reading and language challenges some of my freshmen have this year, I really wanted to do the Odyssey, and I created a playlist. You can get it on YouTube. Maybe we'll put a link in this podcast.
What's it called, Jay?
So it's very mysterious title. I think it's called the Odyssey playlist. But there are little 10 or 20 minute preview videos. They're looms, so you can see my face in the corner. And there's slides. But they're just intro chapters, intro videos for each book of the Odyssey. And then, most importantly for my students, me reading it. Just reading the text. And I've gotten feedback from students and from parents that was really helpful because I have many students who actually would not really benefit from attempting to read this solitary by themselves. Mm-hmm. And it just streamlines the class a little bit. We do read a lot of it in class, like the really iconic moments we'll read and discuss in real time together. But so I guess that's my one point of clarification, that if it serves the big thing that I think we're all after as English teachers, I'll little things like, I know my son uses a particular app when there's like a vocab quiz and that works for him. But that's like data. That's not really
like
what works.
Kind of
exactly. And his writing's awful. So rather than learn how to write better, he'll just do it on the tech, which is what I do with Google Docs. So I'm going to be totally transparent with you.
I can't handwrite anymore because I type all the time.
So I was wondering, like, how is COVID going to change me as a teacher for when, and God only knows, but let's say a couple of years from now, we don't have masks and everybody's in the room.
A couple of years from now? I just had a heart attack.
I don't know.
I just had a heart attack.
I think by the time we fill out our retirement, Paul.
we'll be
I don't know what we'll be. God only knows.
Before you move to that, though, I do want to respond, because that's a little bit of clarification, a little bit of pushback, and I want to say categorically, that what you're expressing is the role tech is supposed to be in, right? It's
like an assist,
role, an assist role to the thing. But here's the threat with all tech, and this is what I tell my students in class, about my kids at home, is that the device with all of its wonders is so overwhelming. And is, I would say, maliciously designed to keep you there in an almost slot machine style. And I think apps are built basically on the psychology of addiction. Mm-hmm. That threatens. There's always this threat for the device to become the thing. What it is always saying to you is there isn't anything else. Literally, my kids at home are on the device. And this has got to be common. They can't think of anything else to do. And I agree with them. No, you cannot. With that,
Dad, I'm bored. Like Paul and I, for the record, for listeners, we have teenagers, and I'm a believer. I mean, there are days I'd rather have a terrorist in my house than a bored teenager. Bored teenagers might be, and I have good kids, and you have good kids, Paul. They might be the worst human beings. Bored teenagers.
But there is nothing else. When there's advice,
How about when the power goes out? Isn't that great? I love when the power goes. Give me snowstorms and lightning on a daily basis.
Right. And then magically they can think of other
We start
things.
playing cards. Because you have to.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's not horrible. You actually accidentally have fun. But the point is this: for the danger with this, it's a supplement. But the danger is that it makes you forget the things that don't fit inside of an app.
Sure.
You forget the things that don't fit inside of the device because it's all the things that are attractive and useful, and they legitimately are.
Yeah.
But you have to hang on to. And the thing that is primary, that I think is outside of the tech, the things that are being served by the tech, and those things fit under my second point, which are that point of mimesis, the point of imitation, of the importance of the representation of reading and writing by someone who's good at it. Mm-hmm. Where you as a student are as close to them as you can possibly be. For me, a really great example, I like working on my own cars, even on things I shouldn't really be touching, and which is many of the things. But I do it anyway. And the first place I go for anything I don't know how to do, I go to YouTube and look up a video, right? And there's somebody with an actual camera. And they're a mechanic sometimes.
This is good tech right now you're describing. So I've done that too with house stuff.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And you can do this in any given thing, right? But this is what I'm struck by. I'm like, I go in and look up how to. I just did this. Take off the tensioner arm, that holds the tension on my serpentine belt. I wanted to replace that. You know, how does that work? I thought maybe one of the bolts was reverse thread. You know, I give these specific questions. So I look at it, watch a few different people do it, you know, generalize and figure out, there we go, look at my own car. But I'm always struck by every time I leave the video and I go to my car thinking, I got it, right?
Yep.
I've done mechanical things, I figured it out. I know, you know, things I should have paid attention to. But every time I get there is a breakdown between my experience of physically doing the thing and watching the videos, no matter how many times I've done it, and it's over and over and over.
Yeah.
And I get better. That point, but there's always a missing part, and that is that part that I think can't be replaced by watching someone or standing beside someone who's an expert at it. If I were in, you know, Bob's garage, you know,
for me, this is cooking.
Yes.
Is what you're talking, because what you were saying about the car, you could have been speaking Klingon to me. But if you were talking about eggplant parmesan, I could tell you the story about how I learned how to make that, and it was by physically being.
Is there a breakdown between the representation of watching a really good chef do it, and then you know, either trying to follow along or turning it off and doing your own kitchen?
I think sometimes I just want to be clear that I think you and I are in agreement. I just think online learning, like when we talk about it for an entire population, there are people for whom this is the only option that's real.
Oh yeah.
And I don't think you would debate that for long.
No,
like,
not at all.
You know what I mean?
Not
like,
at all.
you know, what we're talking about is like a neutral to good you know, you have a decent school system, teachers who care. Like, you know, the other day in one of my freshman classes in the room, I have this really great kid. He's really good energy. He works really hard. He just looked not right. And it just led to we've all done this as teachers.
Yeah.
Follow up after class, stuff going on in the family. And I just, you know, just keep in touch if you need help with anything. I don't know. I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have noticed that if he was a box on a screen and he had his dog in his lap and he was in his room. And you know what I mean? Right. So
no, I'm not talking about, what I'm talking about is what you would choose if you could.
Oh, sure.
Like what I'm trying to hang on to as the ideal for teaching.
Sure.
If two options are put before me, Khan Academy, which is really good, and I think I could learn economics from Khan Academy.
Yeah, right.
Or I could put sitting beside an economist for one-on-one tutorials each day.
Yeah, no brainer.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I don't know, you know, if everyone would agree with that. I do, and it sounds like you do as well. I would choose sitting beside the economist. That's the thing. And if that's true, and if you agree with that, then I think you need to think about what is being filtered out, what is being lost by anything from, I would say a good option would be Khan Academy and others like it. That's just the one I know. To what's being filtered out by Zoom, you know, Zoom classes. What can't be represented by software, you know, essentially, and software tech. Right. And I think it pushes us, you know, that old adage from Marshall McLuhan, the medium is the message. Whatever medium you're using to communicate the message tends to take over the message and not just do what it promises, which tech promises simply to facilitate.
Right.
But it never simply facilitates.
Right.
It also it forms.
Right. It tells you which 10 videos you have to watch next, and you watch them.
Yes. And the video format tells you what you can include, because you have to include stuff that works on video. So
it requires supreme self-control, which most of us don't have all the time. And I think the biggest thing I think there's lots of benefits. Like I said, the benefit of a kid saying, how do you create inferences from a paragraph? What's Mr. Paul? Oh, he has this Loom video and I can watch that like a few times. Like I'm thinking of the kids who don't even speak English native language, like how helpful that's been.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, the part of teaching that isn't academic that I think is really important, the fact that we all as teachers actually care about the human, like we teach humans. Like I like to say I'm an English teacher, but I teach people. Like they're humans and they're all going through things. And I think that unfiltered is much easier to deal with and be perceptive about and respond to in real time after class with the kid next to you.
That's right.
So, but I don't think anybody would disagree with that. I think...
no, I'm just emphasizing it because I feel
COVID's highlighted this, I guess is my point.
Exactly, it's highlighted. And like you're saying, what you're saying is not just that you're teaching people, but people are a certain kind of thing. And this was in that article on the primacy of embodiment, which is people are not brains in a vat. Right. Your brains plus bodies.
Or AP scores or SAT scores or final exam scores.
All the
things,
Right.
right? These students are in a complex relationship that we do not understand to this day, right? I mean, that brain in a vat goes back to Descartes. But you can go back to Plato, you can go back to Aristotle, and then come on right back up to the the present. What is the relationship between the mind and the body?
Right.
We can talk about it, but we don't know.
Well, I think the good news is we teach at a school like this, but I think every school loves its mission statement.
Okay.
And I don't know of a school who doesn't have in its mission statement something like we educate the whole person, something like relationships here matter.
Yeah.
So I think I think if a teacher is feeling like he or she is working for Apple rather than for students, I think the way to raise that concern, this might be idealistic, but that's me, is to just go back to the mission statement that you probably had to sign when you got a job at that school.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, like, well, I'm really just focusing on relationships here, Mr. Principal.
Yes.
So that's why I'm worried is this thing that I really care about.
Pushing. You know, you brought up writing papers as an example, and I had this great experience of I knew a lady who worked for a publishing company who wrote textbooks, and she wrote a textbook, a pretty widely used textbook on research papers in this big series. And I had seen the book in many different schools I'd been in, just on the shelf. So it was, it had sold a lot. And so I talked to her about that, Yeah. And the textbook is kind of like preparing a video or preparing some kind of online unit, because it's the same thing. You're trying to break things down into discrete parts and then organize them to teach them abstractly to any given student, not just to the person in front of you. So I asked her about that process, and it was funny what she said. And this was unsolicited, but I never forgotten it. She said, "Oh yeah, I laid out, I laid the whole research paper project process out in a series of chapters, and each chapter had subheadings like every textbook." She said, and I wrote the sample research paper. She said, but I can't remember if she said this or if I asked her. I might have asked her, because this was in my head. And I asked her, "Did you follow your format when you wrote the essay?"
Excellent. Yeah.
She said no. She said no. She said, "Oh no. I can't write a research paper that way."
Yeah.
And I was like, okay.
Well, it's weird that you mentioned that.
That's what I wanted to know. You have to do it, right? Like, to have a textbook.
Absolutely.
Textbooks are useful. Videos are useful. That means you have to do. And Jay, I just made up this term, so I'm going to start using it.
Yeah.
I'm going to introduce it here.
And then you'll eventually say what I've always said.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Prior quantification.
See, that's.
Do you like that?
I think you
prior quantification. To do a video or textbook, whatever, you have to use prior quantification. That is, you have to break down the things you're teaching into quanta ahead of time.
Yep.
And I realize there's some reality to that. But when you ask someone who's good at writing research papers, you ask someone who's good at writing textbooks, is this the process you use? Not necessarily.
And then you can stop listening at that point. No, I did a summer workshop at school on flipped classroom technology, which I knew nothing about at the time. I ended up that summer working with a tech specialist at our school, and I created a list of videos that my seniors do a research paper on a Shakespearean sonnet of their choice. And this playlist is on YouTube as well. This podcast is just a commercial for other stuff that I do. No, but it ended up being really good, helpful for me, because it did what you're saying this person should have done. It clarified to me what I needed to teach, but it basically walks you through everything from reading a sonnet to the first time to writing a close reading essay on it to how do I read research that's not written for me as a high school kid? How do I incorporate? And then the final slide is me reading my research paper out loud. But I actually follow the process that I suggest. But here's why I mention it. I'm not saying this is the only one of these or that it's particularly amazing. Because I can do this, these kids can do this at home, the normal classroom stuff. My classroom time can be helping the kids who need help the most. Because I have a population most of us do this. Some kids who, if you explain stuff to them once, they basically can do the thing. Yes. And then some kids not. And I can just... So anyway, it streamlined the process. And the big takeaway for me is the research papers are significantly better than they were beforehand. Like the thinking about poetry is better.
Yes.
So that's why but again, to me, and I just keep going back, it has to serve the primary thing. Right. Which is reading and discussing and writing about literature. If it doesn't serve that thing, I have no interest in
understanding in this kind of understanding what a research paper is, and then collecting the parts and composing them in a meaningful order. Right. That's the thing, and how you get there. But this is the point. How you get there is there are almost an infinite number of ways.
Sure.
And of course, every class we teach, we choose a path. Just like the textbook chooses a path, the video chooses a path. Fine. But the point of being in the room with students is that you don't have to choose the same path every single time. Right?
Because students change.
The published textbook, it's published, it's out there. You spend $1 million, producing it. The videos are out there, and like ours, they have millions of views, and you can't take them down. People would be crying in the streets. But in the classroom, you don't have to do that.
Yeah.
And that's pointing back to what we keep saying is like pulling back to the thing. What is the thing? The thing is not that every student, for instance, uses an outline to produce their paper.
Sure.
I
think there's a lot of flaw. This is another podcast. I think coming up with a thesis early on is the dumbest thing you could do as a teacher to encourage the kids.
Yeah, the best thing. It's a great example. I use the term a provisional thesis.
Exactly. Yeah.
Put together
what do you
something you think you might go with, but
because how could you have
if your instructions say come up with a thesis first, and then come up with an argument for.
It's interesting. Think of what we're talking about. This podcast is about teaching during the age of COVID. So we haven't mentioned COVID in a while, but what COVID has highlighted in some new interesting ways is the fact of digital instruction, whether it's through Zoom Classroom or just providing kids digital resources if they miss class. And I think it's just what I hope it does is it leads to conversations like this, which ultimately end up being about why are we teaching?
Yes. Yeah.
Because that doesn't get, weirdly, maybe it's because it's like a philosophical question and people don't like doing that. But if we can't answer that question as schools or as individual teachers, what we're going to end up doing is get pinballed by the agenda of whatever the latest thing is.
Yeah, that's right. And that's my only fear as an avowed troglodyte.
Watch your language, just because there might be children.
This has happened in a small way. We've all seen how Zoom technology can work.
Sure.
And now it is acceptable, let's say, just in holding meetings, to just hold meetings on Zoom because it can work. So that's introduced and showed us that it's actually fine, and it is. But I guess my concern is that we're moving further down that path of forgetting, why we might want to actually be in the classroom together. And I think that's something I want to encourage in myself, thinking of, and others. But I got to give you this even deeper example, okay? Because Jay, as a personal part of my story, I know there was this dark time in my life when I worked for a software company.
It's amazing I'm still talking to you.
Yeah, I know. It's amazing I'm still alive.
Can I just really quickly, we went out for coffee at our favorite coffee place.
Yeah.
When you were working for this company.
Yes. And
you weren't teaching with me, obviously, at the time.
Right.
But within about 13 and a half seconds, we were nerding out about books. And I'm like, what the heck are you doing working? You know what I mean? When you meet people who love literature, it doesn't take long to figure out.
Yeah. It's a whole dark story, and I can't really go into it. It's kind of like the time I was addicted to heroin. You remember that time? It's just a dark period. No, actually, the tech thing was real. And but this is what I want to tell you. I was, every place is interesting in its own way. And, this company had a whole side of its, entity that wrote code. Obviously, they're a software company. So I got to be friends with software coders because they were writing. And at first, I didn't think they were writing. It's not, there's no parallel to writing. They're not writing. But actually, as I dug into it, there really is. And what's really interesting about it is that writing code is, I think, is about as mysterious as writing a novel. Like trying to figure out who's going to be good at it.
Interesting.
That you almost can't know ahead of time. There's just some people who can do it. Others do it mechanically. Like I would write a novel, and it'd just be boring. Although I just want everyone to know that, when my novel comes out, I'm sure it'll be really good.
We'll have a whole episode on it.
Yeah.
I'll even let you do some of the talking.
Really?
I don't know. We'll see.
But here's the thing. Here's the thing that struck me. There are many striking things about it. But the thing I wanted to point out that I think is really relevant to this, and it's on the point of what software promises versus what software delivers. Two things. Even in something as technical as writing code and as specialized as that is, this company, if you had a degree in software engineering, they weren't necessarily interested in you. What was taught ahead of time was of dubious value and sometimes a block to your being a success at their very successful software company. They wanted to sit beside you and watch you do a certain number of tasks that they would throw out there and see what you could do. And anyone, Jay, as unthinkable as this is, you might sit down and actually done pretty well on this without having a single class or a single bit of interest. That's one. That's the my Mesa's point I want to make. Sitting beside another engineer and watching someone else work and think, you know what, I actually kind of think that way. I can kind of do it. Where even a degree, a 4-year degree in the thing wouldn't approach that. And that was a real for them. The second thing, and this one I just cannot get over, and it's my favorite point, just about my favorite thing about that whole dark experience. Do you know who were the best engineers, or what feature that stood out of the best engineers? And these are people I'm friends with to this day who are at the top of the engineering department there. One feature each of them had that set them apart was an enormously acute memory. They remembered, and I would talk to them about this because I was so interested in it. And one engineer there told me, he said, when you talk about a segment of, say like Google Docs, it wasn't Google, that wasn't the company, but the product they made. Like think about Google Docs, the built-in, let's say, spell corrector or whatever. When you said that, an equivalent thing for the thing that he had been involved in making, he could see the code in his head. He could see the line that was scanning the alphabet, or the dictionary to see, and it lived in his mind, and he remembered it. So when someone would say, "Oh, spell check isn't working," he knew, like in space, where it was and what it looked like because they're colors, red and green and blue, on the screen. The other engineer I knew really well never forgot anything. Like I worked with him in other contexts. And he remembered schedules and topics and book titles and author names and conversations we had that I didn't even know we had. But think of the irony of that. These guys are producing a thing, the promise of which is you kind of don't need your memory anymore. Right? Like I knew you and I were doing the podcast today because it was on my Google Calendar. If it wasn't there, I might not have showed up. Right. Like, and that's the promise of tech, is that you don't need basic things like memory anymore. But for the people who are actually producing and creating and growing something, I think this is true, there's not a replacement for these fundamental things like memory. For them, they can't, you would think they would use some software tool to keep track of this. And the people who didn't do as well as engineers. Isn't that interesting? I want to say, like as a deep dive example, even going into the field of software, and then just to bring that back out for a second, if we're thinking as teachers, the promise of certain apps and, tools that are useful. I love Google Calendars, for example. If we think that's going to replace anything that's really important, I think we're thinking incorrectly about it. Is kind of a big point. I think that, to me, that memory illustration is just a strong version of it.
I just have one other thing to say, and that's, I think, a danger being a teacher in 2021, COVID times, but also just advanced technology in general. And you have kids, and what sort of intoxicates them with technology. I think a danger is to try to make literature that. So I think, and this is somewhat philosophical, I guess. What is literature good at? What is Minecraft good at? What are all these things good at? And I'm not saying I don't have students ever use technology ever, but nor am I saying that my experience growing up in the 80s and 90s needs to be the thing that exists forever in my classroom. Like nostalgia is not a way to teach. But that being said, if I try to make something like Pride and Prejudice similar to the sort of online world of my kids, I can do that. And that's kind of a cheap way in. I think the problem is that we would miss a lot of the amazingness of Pride and Prejudice. And to me, I think there's like 85 podcasts dangling in front of us right now that we could do. And one of them is, what's literature good at that other things aren't good at? And let's do that really well.
Yeah, I like that. The other podcast title I want is that quote, "Nostalgia is not a way to teach." Like,
Well, that's what my grandfather said. No, that was a joke. That was a joke. So anyway, no, I think this is helpful.
That's good.
Yeah.
No, that's good. That's that's help. I hope it's helpful to think about this, and it's not easy because it's not black and white. It's not all bad. It's not all good.
Sure,
I think
sure.
That's what we're trying to point out. But there are some judgments that need to be made in there, and I think we need to stay alive to them at least.
Yeah.
Not just kind of roll over either way.
Right. Pay attention.
Pay attention.
Pay really
That's the
close
point.
attention.
Pay attention. The attention pay. That's enormous. So this article is the last thing. We'll close with this. This article I read, from this professor from Wyoming Catholic College, that I never heard of before.
Yeah.
I went to their website, and they are a smartphone-free campus. So this professor is not just writing something; they're actually trying this out. They have this text statement. I wrote down a little bit of it. The cell phone long ago ceased to be a useful tool and began to constitute a person's social identity, or at least the chatter that passes for identity. And they went on and on. And so they've got this whole tech-free campus. This is kind of
It's a private school that's right near us that went device-free 2 or 3 years ago.
Really?
With a lot of success, yeah.
So that's out there. I'm obviously interested in that. My biases are obvious, I think. But there's an interesting point to be made in there.
Yeah, absolutely. And,
All right.
And COVID has brought this up in a new way, which I think is why we're talking about it.
Yeah, that's one of the values of the really terrible last year. Disembodied teaching. It's worth spending time thinking about.
Yeah. Well, thanks.
Hey, yeah. Thanks. I like that, Jay. See you next time.
See you later, Paul.